Welcome to Serenity is Addictive, where we explore the benefits of 12-step spirituality in depth. Let's get ready to dive in deep into this next episode. Catalina!
Morning.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Step 8 and 9.
Getting ready
Stop
to do
delaying. It's time to roll.
Uh-huh.
So we're excited to be back and talk about steps 8 and 9. Step 8 made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And step 9 made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. There you have it, Catalina. What do you think when you just hear those steps? You want me to break it by step?
I think to a lot of people it sounds really scary.
Yeah.
I think it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I have to really face my demons, face my mistakes.
Right.
Like that's stuff that I feel I've gotten over and other people should have gotten over by now too. And yeah, it's scary. And I think guilt, like, oh, here we go, hashing up everything I've ever done wrong. And I get to beat myself and verbally, emotionally flog myself for a while until, I bleed or whatever. Like, I think there's a lot of probably bad connotation that pops up initially.
Yeah, I feel the same. That definitely was my reaction when I first got involved. Scared of the fourth step and scared of like step 8 and 9, like having to make amends, especially to people who really hurt me in my life. That scared me.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you, so I've done 8, 9 a few times, but how did you get over that? Like, how did you get over that fear and what was it like for you?
Well, I think I was fortunate that my sponsor understood the fear. And I mean, I grew up in a religious denomination that has a lot of guilt sometimes. So I think that I had a lot of resistance to anything that was kind of, beating myself up and stuff. But my sponsor was able to kind of walk me through baby steps. And so, I think there's even some books that talk about this, but I don't remember which one. But basically, like, starting with, make a list of all the people and then, pick out the people that you are totally willing to make amends to. And maybe it's for little things, whatever you're comfortable with, like of the comfort level, like pick out the people that you're super comfortable with and start there. And then when you've done that, then slowly, then try the next group, and just kind of like slowly work your way. And it's interesting because I think that what you don't realize happens is as you go through those amends, it feels amazing to let go of that crap from the past. And it feels, I think most people receive the amends really well. Worst case scenario, people are kind of like neutral to it. I didn't really have the experience where I had anybody who was like, I hated your guts for years, But so it was really good, and it kind of like gave me the fuel and the confidence I needed in those baby steps to get to the people that were much harder for me to make amends with. Actually, and Demi Lovato has a really funny story about this.
Please share.
As you guys may know, she's gone through the 12 steps, and she was talking about how she had a girl in high school, I think it was, that was bullied her and really was a catalyst for her to have a lot of insecurities and eating disorder and things like that she has kind of battled for many, many years. So this person made a really big impact on her life. And she was going through her step 8 and 9 to make amends to this person. And she, was really not looking forward to it and really stressed out. And so she called this person up. And this is after she's famous. Called this person up, and the person's like so excited. They can't believe, that Demi Lovato's calling her and whatnot.
She called her to make an amends.
Yeah, she called her to make amends. And she basically said, I'm really sorry for my part in, X, Y, and Z that happened in high school. And the girl was so excited just to hear from Demi. She was like, I don't even remember any of that happening. And Demi Lovato was comically so frustrated because she's like, she like said the line like, "Bitch, you ruined my life by what you said to me," you know, and you don't even remember it. But for me, it's been something I've thought about every day since then, you know. So it's just funny. You never know how things are going to impact people, but it's so great to have it over. You know, it's like looking at Mount Everest, and you start with, you know, just one little piece at a time. You don't, you know, and sometimes, you know, I don't even think Everest you do all at once. You make base camp here and there and kind of slowly make your way up and down because it's such an intense, you know, climb or whatever. So anyways, I don't know. That's some things that popped in my head.
No, that's really cool. I love that you brought up that story. That I saw that as well, and that made me really laugh. And then I think she even includes in one of her songs, the song "I Love You Me," like praying free rent in my head,
yeah,
you know, like for resentments. But yeah, I also had those fears, and I think I also recall that list you're talking about was really helpful to me, to to kind of say like, who's the list of people I feel comfortable making amends to, like it doesn't stress me out, who I kind of feel comfortable with, who I really don't want to, and who I never will. Mm-hmm. And what they said was, you know, once you do that first list, you move to the second, like you'll become more willing as you keep going. And so I thought it was really cool. And similar to you, doing it was really healing. The first amends I made, I believe, to my wife. And I actually did it. It felt really robotic. And my wife was really sweet and listened to me and was, you know, gracious. But I actually like did it like a script, like, you know, I'm really sorry for doing this, and I had like this list, and it didn't feel right. And so I remember asking more people who had more experience than me, like how they did it. And for me, and everybody's different, you know, you can do what you want to do. I know the big book talks about don't lead with the chin and don't be like religious. And I guess like what that means is like you don't come to someone like, I have now, you know, on the spiritual path, and I am now, you know, done with my wrongs, and I will do this amends to teach you how great it is to be someone so great in spirituality. Like, it didn't work for me. And so what I learned to do, I'm curious how it happened for you, Catalina, was just keep it short and sweet, but to say a few key things. Number one, I was wrong. And if I didn't know, and if there was a lot of wrongs, kind of just saying like, I'll just say one right now to you, Catalina. Like, Catalina, like, I want you to know that I've harmed you in the past. There were some things that I did that I was just wrong. I can't remember everything, but I felt wrong that I did that to you. And I'm really sorry that that's happened. You know, is there anything else I can do?
The baby clearly accepts your amends.
The baby accepts my amends, yeah. But
no, it's interesting because
sweet.
I know that like I've heard some people who, in an effort to make things really thorough, they make a list of they kind of take their step 4 and they run with that list for every person, like everything they've ever done to every person. And I'll be really honest, like most people don't want to hear a laundry list of like everything you've ever said about them or done. Like they don't want to hear that. Even if they know what all those things are, which, you know, I think sometimes people forget, and then you're opening old wounds by going through every detail. Like, I also think it's really dumb there's probably some things that you did that they either forgot or didn't know about. And, like, you want to make amends, but you also don't want to be like, by the way, I said this about you behind your back, and I did this to you when you weren't looking. And, you know, so I don't know. I mean, everybody's different. You got to do what you're comfortable with. But my experience is that people, to your point, aren't interested in that. I think if there's a major thing that happened, it's probably good to reference that major thing. Right. But it's you just want it from the heart. You don't want this laundry list. And I love the language of step 9, you know, where it says making amends whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Like, so there's a lot of clauses in that step that try to protect you and other people from being unrealistic or doing something that's actually going to cause more damage.
It's one thing for me, I realize, is this is what I would do. I would say, I learned to get it short and sweet. And I would basically say to people, I was wrong for my behavior. Anything that I did to harm you in any way, where I acted out of selfishness or out of fear or my own insecurities, like that's so beautiful. And then to your point, I would say, like, and I don't know if there's anything specific that you remember that I really, did to bother you. I remember doing this with my dad, and he said, yeah, I didn't invite my dad to my wedding for a lot of reasons because he was divorced from my mother and I didn't want them to be together, and long story. And that really hurt him, but I had no idea. And I said, wow, I'm really sorry. And I have a really good relationship with my dad. And I felt, I actually told him, like, it would have been awesome to have you there. So yeah, just saying that, like, I'm sorry for anything I've ever done in my life to harm you in any way, where I acted out of selfishness, fear, my own insecurity, my own, foolishness. I'm very sorry. I was wrong. Like, boom, that is really effective. And I felt a load off. And it's funny, like, certain people didn't want to take my amends. Mm-hmm. Even, especially some people, I think, who've hurt me more, they felt like that guilt. Like, in some ways, it's like, you shouldn't be, like, apologizing to me. I should be apologizing to you. Without them saying it. Like, I remember there's one family member who was like, no, you don't need to do that. Like, you don't need, and I was like, no, I do. Mm-hmm. And I just said my little piece and I got it over with. But generally, they all went really well. Mm-hmm. And I had none that were really bad. And it's a healing to get that off your chest.
Well, it also doesn't mean healing. That, like, you do amends to these people from your past and all of a sudden they're, like, this huge part of your life again. I think, I think it changed relationships for the better, but I at least personally didn't have, like, people who were all of a sudden this huge part of my life that weren't before, like, I don't know, like, I think people might be afraid, like, well, that, that friendship's over, or that thing's over, so I don't want to bring it back up again or whatever. I don't know. I didn't have that. I'm sure that probably happens, but yeah, I don't know. Oh, but I did remember what I was going to say, though. On step 9 specifically, when it says, whenever possible, except to do so would injure them or others, I think there's a really interesting interpretation of this that I've heard a lot of therapists and, like, I don't know, coaches or whatever do, that I am really not a fan of. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong or that you shouldn't do it. That just means my personal experience with it is not positive, and I haven't met anybody that it's been positive with. Now, I don't know everybody in the world, clearly, so that doesn't mean there aren't people who are doing that positive. But they do this full disclosure thing. And so you have, like, an addict who has a family member, a loved one, and they basically tell them everything they've ever done with their addiction, and it's just so damaging. I just find it really damaging. I just, the way that I see it is, like, I am not God, clearly, and so what that means is I do not have unlimited mercy, unlimited compassion, unlimited forgiveness. I do not have infallible, perfect love for someone. I would love to, but I don't. And so the reality is, like, my love is human love, which means that it is in some ways conditional. Like, someone hurts you enough, it can really affect the way that you feel about them. And so I think, like, a lot of people who think that this helps because they're going to get it all out. The addict oftentimes is looking for this cathartic experience where they get to unload all this stuff and be done with it by being honest with this person they care about very deeply, which is probably somewhat of a good thing to want. And then the other person thinks, if I know everything, I won't be wondering. But I've not met a person that actually happens with. Mm-hmm. The addict usually feels like complete crap because they've shown their ugliest side to somebody who's just not capable of loving them perfectly, because they're not perfect. It's not. It doesn't mean they don't love them. It's just it taps the limit, And I think that the person who hears all the stuff, it's so hard to get past. I mean, you'd think of anybody, not even someone who's an addict, just telling somebody else every dirty, dark, evil, awful thing that maybe they haven't even done. Maybe it's just their thoughts. Nobody is going to receive that. Exactly. Right? Nobody's going to receive that wonderfully. And so I think, like, there's a really important distinction between this step 8 and 9 and like this full disclosure thing. And I think if you read the big book, it even says specifically that they don't recommend that your sponsor, aka the person that you would disclose a lot of this stuff to and help walk you through it, is not somebody that you have like a close relationship with outside of the steps. It's somebody that, like, you know, Raphael said, it's a objective person, because they're not in it. They're not part of that. So anyways, that was something that just came to my mind that I think is important distinction.
That's a phenomenal point, Catalina. Matter of fact, in the big book itself, it actually says that. Like, you have no right to hurt another person with these things. And I think it talked about, I don't know who the person, but there's some person in the big book who was talking about like infidelity or whatever. Like, you don't have a right to hurt. And it says it in the 9th step, right? Except when to do so when injure them or others. And I got to tell you, not AA. AA is pretty good with this because they stick with the big book, right? But a lot of people in other 12-step programs really get this wrong, especially in the area of like sex and love addiction. I've seen a lot of people who really screw this up in the name of good, and you even have counselors and therapists, just like you said, telling them, oh, you've had some infidelity, or you've done this, or you've done, you need to do a full disclosure. I've even, there's some really good therapists I've heard, they're like, this is so necessary.
I feel like I can count the number of relationships that have ended after doing a full disclosure. I gotta tell you, I've met hundreds of people. I've never seen it go well. The only one that came close was someone who had been, whatever his addictions were, he had been clean for like 15 years. And even then, it was like measured. It wasn't this full dumping. And I've seen many go wrong. One in particular was a guy who was really phenomenal. He sponsored me, a really good guy. The one thing I never liked about him was his coaching on step 8 and 9. And actually, he had really bad experience with his step 8 and 9. And he did what I said not to do, and the big book says not to do. He would lead with the chin. So he would meet people and say, you know, I'm now turning over my life. And it just didn't go well. I am now a child of light.
Yeah, I am now a child of light.
Your earthly money has no meaning for me.
Hashtag Austin Pop. No, hashtag Ace Ventura.
Ace Ventura.
Ace Ventura when nature calls. I love that. And so he did a full disclosure before he got into 12 steps with some Christian therapist. And his wife said, I need to take a break, and there was some infidelity. She called his daughters and told the daughters, and he went to the floor in a fetal position. She came back and said, I just told our daughters. He went in a fetal position. He was suicidal. People who knew him had to call him like every half hour on the hour. They would take turns because they knew he was suicidal. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy.
Well, and I think there's another important distinction, too, when we're talking about this step 9 versus full disclosure versus, like, I'm not advocating that you don't tell your spouse or somebody if there's something very important. I think the difference between even a step 9 versus full disclosure is step 9, and hopefully even maybe outside of a step 9, but at the minimum a step 9, like if you cheated on your spouse, like that is probably something really important you need to talk about, and you do need to let them know. But the full disclosure is like, I took a stripper to a hotel 8 times, and I did this, that, and the other with her, and I, this, that, and the other with this person, and that, it's like this every detail, and it's just like, I mean, imagine, the only way I can describe it is like, imagine somebody you love is murdered horrifically, somebody you care about so good, and it's like somebody telling you the every detail excruciatingly of how that person was murdered. And it's just, I mean, it's literally PTSD, in my opinion. It creates PTSD because there's no person who can hear stuff that is so traumatic like that and not be affected by it. And so I think, like, there's a possibility that you may get past knowing that your spouse was unfaithful. And there may be parts about that you want to know. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, But I think knowing every detail of it, feeling like that knowledge is going to free you. I've not seen a spouse that's happened with, unfortunately. It's the opposite. It actually destroys them. Yes. And even the ones who've stayed together, I mean, it's years and years and years and years later, and the spouse has been faithful to a T, and they still just can't get past it. Because I think it's PTSD. I think it emotionally scars the person. So again, I'm sure there are probably people out there who have done it successfully and it's the best experience they've ever had. I don't know them. I've never met them. I've known a fair number of people who have done it, and I've not. It's a 0 to zero score. Nobody's winning.
How about also like when guys get into recovery, sometimes they feel so guilty for the things
That's
they've
the
done.
other thing.
They make their wives their higher power.
Yeah.
Now it's all about this weird thing.
Yeah.
And they say it, it's weird. They'll be like, I need to be honest. So they do something bad. It's like, I need to be honest, to tell her everything.
She's
like,
not
you
your priest, man. She's a human being. She's not a priest.
If you think about it too, Catalina, the funny thing is, like, these are addictions.
Yep.
If you could stop, you wouldn't need a 12-step program. Right. No one in their right mind would do this stuff if they didn't have to.
Exactly.
No one would do it.
Yep.
No, and like this whole idea that it's fun to do these things, it's not fun.
This is your option when all other options are
and you've
gone.
got this addiction because you have a an allergy, you have a mental malady, and you have a mental obsession. You are powerless.
Spiritual malady.
It's crossed that point.
Yeah.
So if I go crazy in my addiction, do all this crazy stuff, it's not moral. It's not that I'm a bad person.
Right.
I'm suffering.
Right.
And I don't know a way out.
Right.
And now that you're getting out of that, like to tell everyone, here's all the crazy things I was doing when I was insane.
They're not capable. It's not because they're bad. It's not because they're just not capable. And I think it's also, we talk a lot about co-addictions, which is basically when you have somebody who's an addict and you're really close with them. It's so difficult to deal with that it actually creates your own issue. So even though you may not be the alcoholic, you have issues from being around the alcoholic a lot, and their craziness kind of seeps into you in different ways. And so I think when you make somebody that higher power, it's really reinforcing that codependent behavior, because the reality is that if that other person, if that spouse or whatever could fix you, they would have already done it. So the reality is when you're in this program, you're not just admitting that your life is unmanageable, but there's kind of an unspoken level that the other person can't fix you either. Because if they could have, they would have already. And so it's yeah. I think we have to end it.
No, I'm just going to do one part.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Catalina. The other thing, tying into the fact that if you have an addiction, it's not a moral thing. I've spent way too many years prior to 12 Steps moralizing addictions that I had, which was so unhelpful. It's another trap to actually get you into the addiction, like guilting myself, shaming myself, hating myself. Why? Because I couldn't stop. If I were a real man, I would stop. All this weird stuff, which leads me to one of the most important things, which I think can be overlooked in many 12-step programs because of the guilt and shame, especially sometimes if you get like super, I don't want to call them old school sponsors, but the tough guy sponsor or the tough woman sponsor was like, put yourself last. But this idea of making an amends to yourself for all the pain you caused yourself. You've hurt yourself. If you have an addiction, you are hurting yourself. You're hurting other people in your wake, but both the hurting of yourself and the hurting of other people is not your fault. It's not moral. You kind of had this as a false solution to your problem, which the inability to live life, the inability to live with the deep insecurities, the deep resentments, the deep fears. So making that living amends, and especially the amends to yourself and a living amends to everyone, is so important. So just saying sorry to someone is one thing, but if you don't change, it's meaningless. And not that you're going to change perfectly, but to be committed to the rest of the steps, which is having that spiritual experience and surrendering your life to a power greater than yourself, whether you call it your inner consciousness, to have this change in life. When there's one focused on the ego and the false self versus being focused on a life of like living your true calling, living your talents, your goodness. It's a whole change, right? The selfishness dies and you're open to something beautiful. Like to live this way is really good for you personally and good for others, right? It's finding your true self. That's what the steps do in my experience. You progressively surrender the parts of you and lose the parts of you that are killing you, that are part of your false self, that are part of your ego. And you learn to run by God consciousness, not ego consciousness. And it doesn't happen perfectly, and we make a ton of mistakes, but it's definitely a more easier, softer way. Catalina, any thoughts on it?
No, I think we've done a pretty good job covering this. I think that's an excellent point. I'm glad that you remembered that because I had forgotten it, and it is really important to include yourself in that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think we did it. Steps 8 and 9, baby. Right at you. We got it. And we will be closing out. And until, I've thrown in a lot of bonus episodes, so I hope you hear really, really cool stuff. And I hope you check that stuff out. A lot of prayers and just a lot of cool things. But the next formal episode will be Step 10. Amen! All right, take care. Thank you for listening to Serenity is Addictive. Until the next time we meet, keep trudging your road to happy destiny. Peace.